When you think about businesses that are selling through the roof, like Skims or Allbirds, sure, you think about a great product, a cool brand, and great marketing. But an often overlooked secret is actually the businesses behind the business, making selling and for shoppers buying simple. For millions of businesses, that business is Shopify. It's home of Shop Pay, the #1 checkout in the world. You can use it to boost conversions up to 50%, meaning way less carts going abandoned and way more sales going through to checkout. Upgrade your business and get the same checkout Allbirds uses. Sign up for your $1 per month trial period at shopify.com/income, all lowercase. Go to shopify.com/income to upgrade your selling today. Shopify.com/income.
Welcome to Accelerate Your Business Growth,
where we're exploring all sorts of business topics. Experts from around the world join me, your host, Diane Helbig, for a conversation where they share their expertise with all of you. Take what you need when you need it. Featured on Inc.com, Forbes, and MSNBC's Your Business, this podcast is recognized as one of the best podcasts for small business, sales, leadership, social media, and more. When it comes to business, Accelerate Your Business Growth has got it covered. And now on with the show. My guest today is John Baird. John built his career working with top leaders at companies ranging from early stage startups to Fortune 500 firms like Apple, Nike, and Twitter. John is currently the senior partner and board chair at Velocity, where he coaches companies at various stages of growth, including Google, DoorDash, and many others. Welcome to the podcast, John.
Thank you so much, Diane. It's great to be here.
It is great to have you here. We're going to be talking about really work structure, decision-making, lead teamwork, all of those kinds of things. Mm-hmm. And I would really like to start with the subject of collaborative work structure. Mm-hmm. I'm curious about the benefit that has to a company's productivity, where you've got multiple levels of employees and they all, even people at various levels have a say in strategic decision making. Mm-hmm. Share with me really the thought behind that and how that benefits a company.
Right. I mean, I think we know that teams do work, right? That having a collaborative process and input from people at different levels, particularly in executing decisions as you cascade decisions down, is really, really critical, right? I think the key that we see is just how that's done, right? How that's managed. Because I think there's a lot of efforts to sort of make teams work, right, et cetera. And the intent by leaders is the right intent, right, to engage, hear the voices, et cetera. But not as much attention given to the decision framework, the communication cadence, the rules to make all these levels of teams, whether it's cross-functional, whatever it is, make it all work. So I find it interesting. We do a lot of work with Masterclass, for example. You probably know, Diane, about Masterclass, right?
Sure.
They're an interesting company. And they have actually what they have defined as a decision-making manifesto. Now, this is a work in progress. We're working with them on this, but it really clarifies what decisions are people going to be involved in, who's going to be involved in those decisions, who's the owner of those decisions, and then how do we cascade and communicate decisions down, and when it's not working, how do we get that feedback? So they've really defined decision owners, decision process. They use a lot of tools like RACI and DAISY and iRapid, which really define who's involved, who isn't. So I think for it to work, Diane, it has to be managed and there has to be a process, because there's nothing worse than having what I would call pseudo participation. We want your input, but when you give it to us, we don't like it. It's like, right. And so that is the worst thing to build trust.
Yeah, boy, I absolutely. And that's I'm so glad that you said that, because I think sometimes leaders of companies, hear that they should be doing this, but they don't really necessarily know how, or they haven't really bought into it. So they sort of fudge it, and then it backfires on them.
It does. Yeah. And I think it's better. I mean, if you have a decision that is going to be like this, and that you're clear, and maybe you say to people, we have a decision that we have made. We want your input in terms of how it's implemented, but we'll hear all that, but we're going to make the final call. It's like, you need to clarify how their voices are going to be used, right? Or this is a decision that has to be a collective consensus. We all need to buy into this because it's critical to the culture, to the product, whatever. If we don't all have a sort of similar perception about how this all works, it's not going to happen, right? So we will stay in this room until we all agree. So I think it's being really clear about the decision process. I want your input, but we'll be making the final call. Let's talk about all the pros and cons, but this group will be making the decision. We will collectively do this. We haven't made it yet, so we want input down through. Just clarify exactly what the rules of engagement are.
Right. It's really, really so important. Like, one of the things that I teach when I teach leadership is that what you want to do is say, there are no bad ideas. There's only ideas we can't implement right now.
Right.
Because it allows people to think and share and put ideas on the table, understanding that their idea may not be the one that's chosen.
Yes. That's really an important concept. I love the way you phrase that. Their idea may not, and that often, Diane, is not said. There's that illusion that because you're putting it out, and there's this whole thing around needing to hear voices and making sure people are included. And it's very, very hard because, we work with a lot of startups through just all their stages. For example, we started working with DoorDash, right? DoorDash has just gone public, but they were once a small company, right? And it's easy to actually make decisions when you are a group of 10, 15, or even 20. And those decisions can be, you can explore and back and forth. You just have buy-in with everything as you go forward. But as companies scale, it becomes really important to actually begin defining, how decisions are made, who makes them, and be really clear about the nature of the input that you want to have. And so I'm finding that as companies get bigger, 50, 100, 150, there has to be a lot more attention given to the process by which decisions are made.
Yeah, for sure. Right. Definitely. It's so interesting because I think leaders don't realize that this really impacts the level of trust that people have in them if they say, we want your ideas, but they don't explain the process. And then people's ideas aren't adopted. And what people are left with is, why did you ask me when you had no intention? People always go to that worst possible motive.
For sure. And so we try to work with companies to actually be clear up front that this is an important decision. Here are the rules of engagement around it. Here's who's going to be involved. DoorDash, for example, they're a little they're not totally like Amazon, but they have a little Amazonian. They're very, very structured. They just get things done in really a good way. But they've used the sort of the Steve Jobs concept. And this was something that came in early days of Steve Jobs, where every sort of decision that was agreed upon had a DRI. I don't really know what that means, but that's a directly responsible individual. It's really clear who the owner is of a decision. So at DoorDash, for example, you would never leave a meeting with key decisions without knowing that's your decision. You're the DRI. And this is a very important concept because sometimes DRIs are designated, but sometimes the DRIs are not always given even though they're told they're the owner, sometimes leaders will actually take that responsibility away, right? So we have in the manifesto that we're working with companies, and masterclass is one, it's, we have what ifs. What if, the DRI feels like you empowered me, but it's really not happening, right? How do you escalate that and talk about that? And that's a really good conversation to have. We have to remember our leaders, our founders of these companies are they're very strong. They're dynamic. They have a lot of their ideas, and they want their ideas to have impact on the company. And if it's a technical company and a product company, they often have lots of product technical knowledge, and they like to be right a lot of the times. So it's hard sometimes for them to let go. And yet, Diane, as we look at engagement survey data, as companies scale, and as they hire, particularly startups, hire more experienced people that come in from other companies that are larger, they want to be involved in decisions. They want to make those decisions. And so we'll not keep people on board, right, unless we empower them in a true way, right? And that's how you build trust, when you actually say that's your decision to make, and you let them make the decision, even though it may be the decision that you wouldn't have gone with, right? That's how you trust. Yeah.
Right. All right, let's stay on trust for a minute, because I'm really curious about building trust in this hybrid environment that we're in. Mm-hmm. It feels like it's a lot more challenging.
It is, right? This hybrid environment with COVID and with Zoom. And I have teams I'm working with that they've hired, new players on the team, and nobody has met each other, face to face, right? So here you go. And how do you build trust around that? And I think that leaders have to figure out different ways to disrupt their normal working day and week. And I call this just disrupting the norm a little bit. Like, I have this thing, Diane, that's kind of fun that I do with CEOs. It's called, water cooler time, right? And water cooler time is just time that a CEO spends with a direct report or a key employee or someone that is not about the work, but it's about how the person is doing, right? And you build trust through relationship building and by understanding people's worlds through empathy. We do a lot of work with empathy-based leaders, but this is a conversation, the water cooler conversation. It's really about, how are you doing? How's it going, right? And or tell me a little bit about yourself. And then we also talk to leaders about being vulnerable themselves, being able to disclose things that they're going through, because everybody right now, it's not working for a lot of people, right? And so as a leader, you've got to be able to identify with that and be human. So you build trust through relationships. You also build trust through good communication, letting people know what's happening. So if a decision that didn't go exactly the way that they thought it would go, do you give context for why that decision happened? Do you explain that? Do you take time to actually create sort of a clear scenario around what happened around that decision, right? So communication becomes really important. And then I would say, I'm a big believer. I do a lot of work with the people that I coach, the CEO or the founder or the leader as coach. And by coaching means just talking to people about the things that are going on that are really troubling them, right? So I have this thing, Diane, this 3-question feedback thing, right? Because we look at surveys and all employees want feedback. They want more feedback from their leaders, right? In general, you build trust a lot through dialogue and through communication. So I have this 3-question kind of thing that I have my leaders use at least once a month or every other session. And so the first one is, here's what's really working well with you, right? So I would say, Diane, here's the thing, I just keep doing this. This is, the way you are just getting accounts closed, the way in which you are closing the loop on things, it's awesome. And give a very specific behavioral example. Number 2 is to say, here's the thing that I'm thinking about that isn't working as well, right? I'm observing this. So you give feedback on what's not working as well from your perception, right? You do that in a very constructive, respectful way, and you give very concrete feedback. And then the third one, which may be the most important question, is how can I, as a leader, support you better? What can I do differently to support you better? So dialogue, getting into their worlds. I mean, these are people, many of whom have, challenges at home, family at home, children at home. They're working, and they're on technology and Zoom all day long. We can talk more about that. Some of the things that I'm suggesting that they break it up a little bit, but again, building trust is it takes time. You've got to work on building that relationship and communicate.
Yeah, boy, it is so. I mean, it is always important. I think it's probably more so now because there are so many other variables. And one of the things that I note is that we're sort of all sharing this same experience, but we are experiencing it differently. And you don't know how someone else, what their experience is.
Yes.
Unless you have that conversation.
Yes. That's so important. I mean, our lives are so complex and we just don't know. There's this little exercise that we do. I mean, sometimes you can actually break things up a little bit. And I'm a big believer, before you get into all the data and how the product's going, et cetera, is to do some icebreaking kinds of things, right? Mm-hmm. And so one exercise that I've done a few offsites through Zoom, and then a few, COVID, I did a few. They went to LA and I did one in San Francisco. But now we're kind of back to, but it's a question that you ask in the very beginning. It's like, if you only knew me, you would know that. And it's interesting when you go around the room, it's like, what people actually share. And it's very interesting. Just people will share what's going on with their lives. You only knew me, you'd know that I'm this, or I have this hobby that I do, or whatever. But getting to know a little more about people, because you can't, you're not face to face. And so you miss a lot of the nonverbal, and you need to be able to create a climate that allows people to talk about the other things going on. And that can be a 5-minute exercise, and then you can move into the work at hand. But it's relationship building, and you're so right. It's time spent doing that kind of work. Yeah,
really makes a difference. And what about feedback the other way, backward or upstream, or, whatever you want to call it. Because I know I encourage small business owners to create feedback loops where they are welcoming feedback and information from their staff, because they want everyone to know that they care about things, and there's things they're not seeing, the leader doesn't see or doesn't realize, or whatever it is. What do you think about that?
Yeah, no, I think upward communication, or, there's a concept, Diane, called, leaders being feedback receptive, right? What does it mean to be receptive to feedback, right? And we do a lot of observation of groups. I mean, when I do work with the CEOs that I coach, I often will watch him or her in a meeting, right? Just, and how they actually engage. And there's a lot of interesting dynamics around inclusion, right? Inclusion behavior. Because if you've got a couple new players on the team, but you've got a lot of players that have been with you a long time, it's interesting to see who talks to whom and how much people talk, right? It's interesting. So we try to get people to broaden the feedback and to encourage more voices to be heard. And it really boils down to, I think, and we talk about this in our book, the book that we have that's coming out, around the art of asking good questions, because it is about that. And I do feel that questions, the way you phrase a question, so, CEOs and leaders tend to talk too much at meetings in general. If you look at all the data that we've collected, they talk sometimes 50 to 60% of the time, and they wonder why their teams are not actually coming, because they're not really spending time giving space to others. So I'll say, ask a what question, like you say something, and then, so what do you all think about that? Or what would success look like? Or what things are we missing around that idea, right? And then I will tell them, you wait 10 minutes. I call this, Diane, the 10-minute wait rule, right? And for some people who are very extroverted and they want to jump in, it's very hard. And they say, "You mean I can't talk?" I said, "Well, you could ask questions like, do others have the similar thoughts?" You could play the facilitator role, but in 10 minutes, you want to hear what is missing. What do people think about that, right? And so getting them to be receptive and to truly listen and to hear the voices of others becomes really important. So there's an art to that. And it is the art of being a good listener, but the art of asking the right questions and then giving space to others.
Right. Yeah, I love that. That is really great. We don't listen well enough, I think. I think that's, something just about everyone could work on. And it becomes intentional.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
We have to own that we're potentially distracted, or we already have decided what the outcome of the conversation is going to be. So,
yeah, I like that idea. I like that idea, Diane, of owning it, right? Owning that. I think that's really important, right? And being able to say, but even being real with people in the room, right? If you've had a frustrating day or things have not gone well, be able to say, I'm not in a good place today. And sometimes by saying that, you just start off, and it's like it's a way of saying that, and then you get back in the groove, but helping leaders become more real, more authentic. I mean, they're human. I do find that in particularly the last year and a half, it's been harder, I think, for leaders to control things, right? There's more stress. I find there's more just mental anxiety expressed. There's more, if people have a natural tendency to fly off and even get angry, I see more of that, less emotional control around it. And so it's interesting how, and a lot of it's because of COVID and just in general, and just their worries about things. And so helping them actually center on what that's really all about, managing that in a better way, being authentic about it, being real, calling it out for people, letting them own some of that, as you're suggesting, is very authentic, because leaders are human. We have a lot of leaders who do adhere to the impostor syndrome. It's like they just have to be this leader that everybody expects them to be. And yet underneath it all, there's fears, anxiety, and often if they only knew I didn't know this and found me out, the impostor syndrome, it would be crazy. So getting people to confront those fears and anxieties in our coaching session, and then being able to manage that in a way is very productive. We found people can be very authentic in that. So,
well, sure, because it's so sad, because it's a self-fulfilling prophecy. Mm-hmm. You behave in a way that doesn't engender trust, because you feel like you're supposed to be a certain kind of leader, which is not the leader that other people resonate with.
Yes. And
so then you don't get the teamwork and the dedication and the buy-in and all of the other things that you need. And it just perpetuates itself. It's nothing good comes from it.
Yeah, exactly. And I think it's really getting people to confront some of those things that are somewhat deep. It's interesting. Our book, Sea Change, which comes out in, maybe we're in the final editing of the final pages of the manuscript right now and getting it in. But it really is based upon the assumption that there's not a lot of, people they want tips and they want tools, and they, tell us how to be, and I want to be like this leader or whatever. All these techniques and things that prescriptions, right, on how to do things. The book is more around just confronting some basic questions that you need to ask about yourself as a leader, like what do I need to succeed, and what am I afraid of, my fears, what are my desires, deep desires that actually are good, but some that are derailing. What is your unrecognized gift? Play to your strengths. And then what is my purpose? And so the idea is that you go deeper around those things, right? Uncover those things. So we talk a lot about examples of people that we've coached that have gone through these questions. We think great leaders are curious about themselves and really develop an empathy around all of that. And that makes them the leaders that I think are the great leaders.
Yeah, I do too. And one of the things that I think, this is my opinion about leadership, is that you're not expected to have all the answers. You're expected to convene the resources to find the answers.
Mm-hmm.
So, which I think, especially with small business owners, they think everyone is looking to them to solve every problem and have every answer. And you can't. I mean, it's just impossible. But you can pull together resources and conversation and brainstorming and that sort of thing. And out of that, find an answer, something to implement to give it a shot.
Yeah. No, I think expanding the role of the leader, not thinking the leader is the one who makes all the calls, has to be right all the time. That good leaders also learn, and I love your word convening a group together. I think good leaders wear many hats. I have this what I call this sort of hat trick kind of thing. It's like, which hat are you wearing in the room? And you should wear multiple hats, because one hat may be a decisive hat that you're going to make the call. One might be that you want to convene them and come together and have a consensus. It could be a hat of just exploring new ideas. So, it's a really curiosity. It's just a brainstorming kind of thing. It also could be a hat of just inspiring, just telling people that we are on the right track, that we're doing really well. So which hat are you playing? I get a lot of feedback, Diane, that people aren't exactly sure. When the CEO's in the room, what hat is he or she playing, right? And there's a tendency, I know when I did work at Apple, for example, there was always a tendency with the leaders there to, when somebody says something, it's like, well, now we need to go down that path, right? And the leader really didn't mean that, right? It was like they threw out an idea, but they never really clarified exactly that. I don't want you to go down that path. I want your ideas on what we might do with that. So leaders need to be clear about their role, because it's not always obvious to people. And again, I think it's creating context and explaining, I'm going to be a participant in the room, right? I'm not going to say a lot about this, all right? This is your meeting, right? We're not going to make a decision about this meeting here. I want to hear everybody's ideas, because I have no idea what to do with this, right? Yeah. So do you define your role? It's really an important concept for leaders to clarify that. So yeah, interesting.
Definitely. Yeah. I can totally see that. So I'm just going to ask you a question, and boy, it just left my head. It did. Shoot. It was, as my grandmother used to say, it was probably a lot. Darn it. It was around, I know what it was.
Yeah.
I find oftentimes that leaders don't communicate enough, like that they should probably over communicate, because they have this belief that other people know what they know, or already know the foundation of whatever the situation is, or the mission, the vision, where we're going, what's happening. I fill in the blank. It could be just about anything. And I'm curious, what you think about that. Do you see that in the work that you do?
The question is more about what, just clarity of their vision and purpose, or like,
how well do they communicate enough?
Just the amount of communication all over that. No, I mean, my answer to that is that you can't. I mean, we work so much on communication, right? Yeah. And I think that a lot of the leaders that I work with when they move from the early stage, the middle stage, and then they go public, because we often, our coaching work often takes them through all that. And then we're with them also as they go public. And again, it's interesting, Diane, these are young founders. So we work with very young founders who are now CEOs in public companies, like Tony Xu of DoorDash, right? Yeah. Very interesting. So, but those companies have a very clear communication plan. Now, it's different when it's small and medium, but it's like, who are your stakeholders? Who are the people that need communication? How do you bring them together? How do you do that? Once you make a decision on the leadership team, is it cascaded down? I have groups now that have their 7 to 10 people on their team, and then they bring the expanded group of 20, which are the leaders in the organization, and then they have their all hands meeting. And the messages are usually that I like consistent messaging around things. Like, this is where we're going, and these are the shifts we've made. I love those communications to talk about the what. Here's what is important. We're focusing on these critical things. Here's why. And I love the connection to the mission, which is really, we're doing these things because this is really part of who we are as an organization. But it might be a little bit different as you go down through the organization, the questions and answers with the all hands meetings. But you cannot spend enough time thinking about the right strategies for those meetings. As the company grows larger, it's so critical to have consistent messaging and to do that on a regular basis. And the companies that are doing that are the ones that are most productive, I find.
That's really interesting. And
so
challenging.
They manage their communications, and sometimes they have somebody doing it for them. And sometimes they actually script out the CEO. I mean, some of them are not as adept at maybe doing that, but they can be scripted around that, right? But it's very intentional. I have some CEOs that have their direct report one-on-one time, or they do their water cooler time with people. They try to create small groups where they just go down through the organization and meet skip levels, Diane, skip levels, where the CEO and the leader goes down the organization in a particular product space and just meets people and communicates. That communication role, whether it's all hands, whether it's one-on-one, whether it's skip level meetings, et cetera, it needs to be a significant part of their time.
Yeah, I completely agree with you on that. Completely. Yeah. I'm developing like this picture in my head of a CEO, a leader, and how they're navigating their organization in person, virtually, with that communication, with those touch points.
Yes.
With people, right? So
yes. That's a good word, touch points. What are the critical touch points, right? There's a very interesting thing. I do a lot of sort of calendar time management with leaders, right? I'll say to you, let me see your calendar over the last month or last 3 weeks. And then I'll use, McKinsey has a really nice model on just practices that they've determined that when a company gets so far, you should be spending time with your board. You should be, because I deal with a lot of venture firms, lots of companies that are well invested, right? With lots of venture companies. How much time do you spend on the strategy of the organization? How much time do you spend on just building the team parts? What about external partnerships outside the org? So it's like a pie chart, Diane, and you can go through that. And all of a sudden you look at calendar and they'll say, I need to be doing more of this, but you look at how their calendar is just driving them and they're not working on the right things. So, and the biggest thing I get feedback on is that CEOs are not spending enough time on looking around the corner, thinking about what's next and planning for the next year. And that's all, and that's strategy time. So I actually will say, you got to have a half a day of your time in a week on just reflection. If you're walking, whatever you want to do, but spend time thinking about what's next for the organization. Usually that's not on. And remember, these are often technical founders that love doing things, right? Love getting in the weeds. But they need to raise their heads up and begin to talk to people about what's next for the company. And that's strategy. If you're not doing strategy work and thinking about that and having conversations with people, you're probably not leading.
Yeah, right. Boy, that feels like that would be a very interesting thing, a very interesting shift for some of these founders to take.
It is. And as their companies get larger, right, as they grow, because we sometimes start with them when they're smaller and then we're with them as they get larger, their roles shift and what's natural. And what's natural in terms of their default when they founded the company is probably not what is needed to scale the company to the next level, which is why some CEOs, boards will replace them. That happens. I mean, it happens.
Yeah, right.
People come in, and do we have the right leader? We like to think that we can scale those leaders to the next place, but that depends a lot on the flexibility of a leader to adapt to some of the new role challenges.
Right. That is for sure. Yeah. Wow, John, I so love this information in this conversation. Will you share with the listeners, how they can find you, how they'll be able to get the book when it's out? Right.
So it's, you can reach me at Velocity Coaching. I don't know whether you have it, but it's John at velocitycoaching.com. We also have our website, which is Velocity Coaching, www.velocitycoaching.com. And the book Sea Change is coming out in 2022, probably in February or March, depending on just what date they decide to put it out with. But it has a lot in it around some of the things that we've talked about today around what makes leaders great leaders. And it's the art of really asking yourself really some very fundamental questions that make a difference in who you are as a leader. So I think that's probably the best way to reach us, and be happy to connect with anybody who wants to talk further.
That's so great. Thank you so much. I think this was really valuable information. You're doing some really great, meaningful work. So thank you for taking time out of that to be with me.
Yes. Thank you, Diane. Thanks for all your questions. It was great to dialogue with you. It was a pleasure.
You as well. Thank you.
All right. Thanks, Diane.
Thank you for tuning in to this episode of Accelerate Your Business Growth, a production of Evergreen Podcasts. Discover more episodes of this podcast and explore others at evergreenpodcast.com. As always, continue to prosper and be curious. And if you're looking to get your sales strategy headed in the right direction, pick up a copy of Succeed Without Selling on Amazon or wherever books are sold. Until we meet again on another episode of Accelerate Your Business Growth, goodbye and good day.
Do you love news about LinkedIn, Indeed, Google, and just about every other recruitment tech company out there?
Hell yeah. I'm Chad.
I'm Cheese.
We're the Chad and Cheese Podcast.
All the latest recruiting news and insights are on our show.
Dripping in snark and attitude.
Subscribe today wherever you listen to your podcasts.
We out.